The morning my son brought Claire home for the first time, I was underneath the kitchen sink fixing a leaking pipe. I had grease on my hands and a torn flannel shirt on my back. I heard the front door open, heard Nathan say, "Dad, we're here," and I took my time finishing the joint before I crawled out. Claire shook my hand. Her eyes moved across the room, the worn couch, the old television, the stack of library books on the coffee table, and she smiled the way people smile when they've already decided something. I smiled back and said nothing. That was 18 months ago. And if I had corrected her assumption that day, everything that followed would have ended very differently. Not for me, for her. My name is Raymond. I am 64 years old. I drive a 2009 pickup truck with a crack in the windshield that I have been meaning to fix for 3 years. I buy my jeans at Walmart. I cut my own grass. On Tuesday mornings, I walk to the diner on Clement Street, and I eat the same breakfast I have eaten for 20 years. 2 eggs over, easy, wheat toast, black coffee. What Claire did not know, and what I chose not to tell her, is that I own 8 residential properties in this county. I bought the first one in 1987 with money I saved working double shifts at the plant. I bought the second 2 years later. By the time Nathan was in middle school, I had 4. When my wife Linda passed 11 years ago, she left me her half of everything we had built together, and I kept building. Slowly, carefully, the way you do when nobody handed you anything. 8 properties, 31 rental units total. Every one of them paid off. I never talked about it. Linda and I agreed on that early. You don't wear what you have, you just have it. Nathan grew up knowing we were comfortable, but he did not grow up knowing the specifics. I planned to sit down with him properly one day, with the documents in front of us, and walk him through all of it. I was waiting for the right moment. I was still waiting when he told me he and Claire were engaged. I remember sitting in my truck in the driveway after he called, just sitting there with the phone in my hand. Not because I disliked Claire. I barely knew her. But something Nathan said stayed with me. He said, "She thinks it's really sweet, Dad. How simple you keep your life." He was laughing when he said it. He meant it as a compliment. I thought about correcting him. I thought about saying, "Nathan, let me tell you something about simple." Instead, I said, "That's kind of her," and I let it sit. The wedding was in October. Small and nice, a venue outside of town with oak trees and string lights. I sat at the head table and gave a short toast and drank 1 glass of champagne. Claire looked beautiful. Nathan looked happy in the way young men look happy when they believe they have figured everything out. Her parents were there, her father, Gerald, a commercial real estate developer from outside Atlanta, and her mother, Patricia, who wore a lot of jewelry and asked me twice what I had done for work before retiring. That was true. She nodded and moved on to someone more interesting. I watched Gerald that evening. He was the kind of man who scans a room the way a contractor scans a job site, calculating, measuring, looking for what can be improved or acquired. He and Claire had the same eyes. Not bad eyes, just always working. The first 3 months after the wedding were quiet. Nathan and Claire settled into their apartment across town. They came for Sunday dinners every couple of weeks. Claire was pleasant. She asked about my health, complimented whatever I had cooked, helped clear the table. I had no complaints. Then one Sunday in January, she asked me how long I had lived in the house. I said 31 years. She said it must hold a lot of memories. I said it did, she said, almost casually, that the neighborhood had really come up in value over the past decade. Had I ever thought about downsizing? Maybe something with less upkeep? I looked at Nathan. He was looking at his plate. I said the house suited me fine. She smiled and said, "Of course, of course." She just wanted to make sure I was comfortable. She said it with such warmth that if I had not been paying attention, I might have believed her. I was paying attention. 3 weeks later, Nathan called on a Wednesday evening and said he and Claire had been talking. I had come to understand those words, Dad. We've been talking the way you come to understand a weather pattern. Every time he said them, a front was moving in. He said Claire had mentioned that maybe I could use some help with finances. Not that anything was wrong, he was quick to add. Just that managing things alone at my age could get complicated. He said Claire's father knew a financial advisor, very reputable, and they thought it might give me peace of mind to sit down with someone. I asked Nathan whose peace of mind he was talking about. He laughed a little uncomfortably. He said, "Dad, we just want to make sure you're taken care of." I told him I appreciated that. I said I would think about it. I hung up and called my attorney, Howard. Howard and I went to the same church for 15 years. He updated my will 6 years ago, and he knows every property I own, every trust arrangement, every document. I told him what had been happening. Howard was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Raymond, do you want to move anything around?" I said not yet. I said I wanted to see what they were actually after first. He said to call him when I needed him. I told him to keep his calendar open. In February, Claire started dropping by the house unannounced. Always with a reason, returning a dish, dropping off something Nathan had left at their place. She would come in and sit down and we would talk, and eventually she would steer the conversation somewhere interesting. How did I handle the taxes on the house? Did I have a financial planner? Had I considered a reverse mortgage? She said her father had helped a lot of elderly neighbors structure their assets more efficiently. She said efficiently like it was a gift she was offering. I told her I kept things simple. She smiled at the word. I want to be clear about something. I was not cruel to Claire. I did not play games with her or pretend to be confused. I simply answered her questions honestly without volunteering anything beyond what she asked. I am 64 years old, not senile. I have been managing complicated finances for longer than she has been alive, but she had decided what I was the moment she saw me crawl out from under that kitchen sink, and I saw no reason to update her. In March, she asked about the house directly. She sat at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around a coffee mug and she said, "Raymond, I hope you don't mind me asking, do you own this house outright or is there still a mortgage?" I said there was no mortgage. Her fingers moved slightly on the mug. She asked when I had paid it off. I said 2003. She said that was wonderful. She said a paid-off house in this neighborhood was worth serious money now. Did I know what comparable sales were running? I said I had a rough idea. She said her father's firm had actually been very active in this area. She said if I ever wanted an informal valuation, just to know where I stood, he would be happy to take a look. No pressure, no obligation. I thanked her. I said I would keep that in mind. After she left, I stood at the window and watched her get into her car. She sat there for a moment before she started the engine, and I could see her on her phone. I did not know who she was calling. I had a good guess. April brought Nathan to my door on a Saturday morning, alone. He came in and sat at the kitchen table, and he had the look he used to get as a boy when he was about to ask for something he already knew was complicated. He would set his jaw a certain way and look at the table instead of at me. He said Claire had been doing some research. He said he hoped I would hear him out. I told him to go ahead. He said that from what Claire had looked into, the property tax situation on a house this size could get difficult for someone on a fixed income. He said her father had suggested a structure where the house could be transferred into an LLC for tax purposes. He said quickly, "Nothing else." He said it would protect me. He said Claire's father would co-sign on the LLC filing if I needed help setting it up. I looked at my son. I said, "Nathan, who would own the LLC?" He looked at the table. He said it would be a joint structure. Me and them together. I asked him to say that back to me slowly. He rubbed the back of his neck. He said it would be a way for the family to collectively manage the asset. He said Claire's father did this kind of thing all the time. He said it was just smart planning. I asked Nathan directly, was this his idea or Claire's? He did not answer right away. That was my answer. I told him I needed to think about it. I asked him to give me a couple weeks. He seemed relieved to have a delay instead of a refusal. He hugged me before he left, and I held on to him a moment longer than usual, because he was still my son and he was in over his head without knowing it. That afternoon I called Howard. I said I was ready to start. Howard and I spent 3 evenings that week going through everything. He prepared documentation showing clear title on all 8 properties, every one in a trust structure Linda and I had set up years ago. A structure that was already more tax efficient than anything Gerald could have dreamed up, and that named Nathan as the sole beneficiary, with ironclad language that no spouse could access or transfer. without Nathan's explicit consent and independent legal counsel. It was airtight. Linda had insisted on it. Howard also wrote up a one-page summary document, a plain language overview of every asset I held. He suggested I might want to share it at the right moment. I thanked him and put it in a folder in my desk drawer. In May, Claire asked if she could bring her father to meet me. I said of course. Gerald arrived on a Saturday afternoon in a car I recognized from the manufacturer's badge top trim. He was well-dressed and pleasant, and he had the handshake of a man who practices it. He admired the house, said it had good bones, said the lot was an exceptional size for this street. We sat in the living room, and Gerald talked for a while about market conditions. He talked about estate planning and generational wealth and tax efficiency. He was smooth. Under different circumstances, I might have enjoyed the conversation professionally. Then he unfolded a document on my coffee table. It was a draft LLC operating agreement. My name was listed as a founding member with a 40% interest. Claire's name and Gerald's name together held 60%. The assets listed for contribution included this house, described as my primary residence. Gerald explained it carefully. He said this was purely protective. He said I would remain in the house for as long as I wanted. He said the LLC would simply allow the family to manage the asset together and avoid probate. He said it was what he would do for his own father. I looked at the document for a moment. I asked Gerald what he knew about my financial situation. He said what Claire had shared with him. A retired man, fixed income, a paid-off house. I nodded. I asked him if he had done any independent research. He said he hadn't felt it was necessary. I stood up and excused myself for a moment. I went to my desk and I took the folder out of the drawer. I came back and sat down. I set the folder on the coffee table next to his LLC agreement. I told him I wanted to share something before we went any further. I opened the folder and I slid the one-page summary across the table. Gerald picked it up. He read it. His expression did not collapse dramatically the way it might in a movie. It changed slowly the way color drains from something. He looked up at me. He looked back down at the paper. Claire, who was sitting next to Nathan on the couch, leaned over to look. Nathan leaned over too. The summary listed all 8 properties by address. It listed the approximate current market value of each. It listed the trust structure. It listed Nathan as sole beneficiary. At the bottom, Howard had noted the combined estimated value, just under $2.4 million. Nobody said anything for a moment. I picked up Gerald's LLC agreement and held it up. I told him I appreciated the work that had gone into this. I told him my attorney had reviewed something very similar 2 weeks ago. I told him the trust structure Linda and I set up in 2009 already accomplished everything this proposed to accomplish, with better protections, better tax treatment, and no outside parties involved. I said I had been managing these assets for 37 years without difficulty, and I intended to continue doing so. I said Nathan had always known he would inherit everything. I said that had never been in question. Gerald looked at me. He said quietly that he had not known. I said I understood. I said I had noticed. Claire said nothing. She was looking at Nathan. Nathan was looking at the summary sheet. He turned it over as if there might be something on the back. He set it down. He looked at me. He said, "Dad?" I said, "Son." He said he did not know. I said I knew he didn't. I said that was something I should have corrected sooner, and I was sorry for letting it go so long. I told him I had planned to sit down with him properly and walk through everything, and I had been postponing it. And that was my mistake. He was quiet. His face was doing several things at once. Gerald folded his LLC agreement and put it back in his jacket. He stood up and said he thought they should give us some time. He said it was a pleasure meeting me. He meant none of it, and we both knew it, and that was fine. He was a businessman. He had made a calculation, and the calculation had been wrong. I did not hate him for it. Claire stood too. She looked at me once before she turned toward the door. It was not anger exactly. It was the look of someone recalculating. I had seen that look before in negotiations, in conversations where someone realized midway through that they had misread the room entirely. Nathan stayed. He sat at my kitchen table after they left. both hands flat on the surface, not speaking. The late afternoon light came through the window the way it always does at that hour. That particular gold that Linda always said made the kitchen look like a painting. I made coffee. I set a cup in front of him. He said, "Dad, why didn't you tell me?" I said I was asking myself the same thing. I said part of it was old habit. Linda and I kept things private for so long it became second nature. Part of it was that I was waiting for him to be ready. And part of it, I admitted, was that when I saw how things were unfolding, I wanted to understand what I was dealing with before I showed my hand. Nathan looked at his coffee cup. He said he felt like an idiot. I told him not to. I told him I had let it happen by staying quiet too long, and that was on me. I told him Claire had not invented anything that wasn't already there because I had left a gap. People fill gaps. He said he still should have asked. He said he should have pushed back when Claire started steering things. And he hadn't, and he knew why it had felt easier to let her handle it. He said he was ashamed of that. I told him shame was only useful if it led somewhere. He asked what I thought he should do now. I said that was between him and his wife. I said I had no opinion about his marriage. That was my place to give. What I had was time. Time I should have used differently, and I intended to use it better going forward. I told him I wanted to sit down with him properly, the way I had always planned to, and walk through everything, so he understood not just what existed, but why, and how it worked, and what Linda had wanted for him. His jaw tightened at Linda's name. He always does that, a small thing he has done since he was 12 years old, since the year she got sick the first time. He said he would like that. We sat at that kitchen table until it was dark outside. I went through everything, how it started, how it grew, what each property had cost, and what it had taken to hold on to it in the lean years. I told him about the winter of 1994, when we nearly lost the third building because the boiler failed and the insurance disputed the claim, and I worked weekends for 4 months to cover the repairs. I told him about the deal I almost made in 2001 that would have overextended us, and how Linda sat me down and said, "Raymond, we are not doing this." And she was right. I told him about the trust, about Howard, about what Linda's instructions had been. He listened to all of it. He did not check his phone once. Near the end, he said, "She thought you were just a regular retired guy." I said I was. He said, "Dad." I said I meant it. I told him I drove the same truck I had driven for 15 years because it ran fine and I liked it. I told him I bought my jeans at Walmart because jeans were jeans. I told him I fixed my own pipes because I knew how and I liked knowing how, and there was nothing about any of that that changed because of what was in a folder in my desk. He smiled a little. He said, "That was very you." I said I knew. He asked me one more thing before he left. He asked if I was angry. I thought about it. I said no. I said I had been watchful, and I had been careful, and maybe I had been a little bit satisfied at the end of it. Not in a mean way, but in the way you feel when a thing you built holds up under pressure and you get to see it hold. I said the harder feeling was something I could not put a clean name on, something between regret and relief. The feeling of a man who let things drift a little too long and caught them just before they drifted out of reach. I said the most important thing was that he knew now. All of it. And that I should have told him years ago. He hugged me at the door. He held on for a moment. I put my hand on the back of his head, the way I did when he was small. After he left, I stood on the porch in the evening air. The neighborhood was quiet. The oak tree in the front yard that Linda planted the year we moved in was coming into its spring leaves. I had been meaning to have the lower branches trimmed, and I kept forgetting. I went inside and I called Howard. He picked up on the second ring. I told him it was done. He asked how it went. I said it went the way things go when you are patient enough to wait for the right moment and you have spent 37 years making sure you have something worth waiting for. Howard laughed. He said Linda would have loved this. I said I knew she would have. I said she would have had something specific and pointed to say about Gerald's jacket. Howard laughed again. He told me to get some rest. I locked up the house and turned off the downstairs lights. I walked through the kitchen where Nathan and I had sat, where that gold evening light came through the window that Linda always called her favorite thing about the whole house. I turned off that light last. I went upstairs. I set the folder on the nightstand on my side of the bed. I slept the way I have learned to sleep over these years, not perfectly, not without weight, but soundly. The sleep of a man who built something slowly and carefully and watched it hold. 3 weeks later, Nathan came by on a Sunday morning alone. He came in and sat down and told me that he and Claire had been doing a lot of talking. Real talking. He said the kind they probably should have been doing for a while. He said Claire had admitted that her father had pushed the idea harder than she had let on. He said she was embarrassed. He said they were working through it. I told him I was glad they were talking. He said she wanted to apologize to me in person. He asked if I was open to that. I said, of course I was. I said she was his wife, and that made her family. And I had not given up on family in 64 years, and I was not about to start now. He nodded. He looked at the table for a moment, and then he looked up. He said, Dad, thank you for not giving up on me either. I told him there was never a version of this where I gave up on him. Not ever. That was not something he needed to thank me for. That was just the job. He smiled. He said he knew. We had breakfast together that morning. I made the eggs the way he likes them, scrambled, not runny, and we ate at the kitchen table where 37 years of decisions had been made, where Linda used to sit across from me with her coffee and her opinions and her stubbornness that I had loved more than I knew how to say, where the morning light came through the window and made everything look, just for a moment, like it was exactly enough, because it was. It had always been exactly enough.